you remember that music? You remember John Denver's music and that just sort of carefree time, the beautiful poetry and music of John Denver in the 1970s. And as shocking as you're going to find this, I remember that music as well. I find that shocking that I was issued pre-1970. But anyway, John Denver and Sweet Surrender. I love the song, and while the song has our monthly theme, Surrender, in the title, I really chose the song for this service for the lyrics. And I think it serves this service and my message very well today. And the opening line of that song talks about lost and alone on some forgotten highway. And I suppose that all of us have some basis for comparison with feeling lost and alone, whether it's right now or at some point in life. And as I witness the goings on in the world today, the things that are so often talked about, and separation and division, and the things in the evening news, and all those things that seem to capture one's attention so easily, I think if you view that just from a distance, it's easy to see humanity in some way, this beautiful humankind that is 8 billion strong, in all different shapes and sizes and creeds and nationalities and belief systems. It's easy in some ways to see this humankind as lost in some way with our state of affairs. And we come to our center on Sundays, and we go to other religious science centers and new thought centers, and there seems to be this idea, at least this old school religious science idea, that as soon as we walk through the doors we can no longer talk about those things because to do so gives them life and makes them more real. So turn away, look away, deny, do not acknowledge, do not discuss those things, because to do so means you're not being a good religious scientist. And I will tell you that's not my brand of religious science. And so I wonder, going back to our monthly theme of surrender, if instead of not looking at, not acknowledging, denying, turning away from those things we see going on in the world, what might happen if instead we surrendered to them? Because I believe that until I can make an accurate assessment about where I am, it becomes very difficult to choose a new direction or to figure out how I arrive somewhere else. And so what would it mean then in this context to surrender to what we see going on in the world? What would that mean? And in a moment, I will ask Thor to put a definition on the screen of surrender. And this definition is from an author. Her name is McCall Erickson. She has a book or two out. She also she writes a blog on her own website. And Thor, if you'd put that slide up. McCall Erickson's definition of surrender is this: giving up what we think should be happening for what is actually happening. Giving up what we think should be happening, because we tend to spend so much time in that it should look like this, it should work in this way. And we spend so much time there, it becomes difficult to deal with the reality of a situation. And so this idea of surrender is not one of weakness. It is not one of surrendering to the enemy, as I believe Brad mentioned in his meditation this morning. It is not that. This idea of surrender is an idea of tremendous freedom. That I develop a willingness to no longer deny, to no longer look away from, but to look squarely at, to look reality squarely in the face, so that I step into a freedom that says I can do something about this. I can make another choice. I can move in a new direction. John Denver, in his song Sweet Surrender, also speaks so beautifully to this place of freedom. And he talks about the fish in the water and the birds in the air and all those things as well, which is kind of cool that all came together in that way. You both referenced the fish in the water and flowing with the current and that sort of thing. But John Denver speaks to this level of freedom in his song, where he says there is this level of freedom that in his words, there is nothing behind me, and there is nothing that ties me to something that might have been true yesterday. My God, do you feel power and freedom in that? To stand on such solid ground, to be so free as to say truthfully, there is nothing behind me and nothing that ties me to something that used to be, that I am free to create brand new. I am free to create from this field of pure potential that we so often talk about, that we spend words on. And yet it's a very different thing to stand in that level of freedom, I think. Can you imagine in your own life being that free? And so if that is real, if that is a real possibility, to have nothing that tethers me, no old thoughts, no old upsets, worries, blames, that I can be free of that and create from uncharted territory. Why aren't we? Why are we not exercising that level of freedom? And the answer, as I see it, is that old stuff up here that, in fact, does sometimes tie us to past experience. The difficulty of getting past some of those old ideas, those old thoughts, those old judgments about how things should be or about how others should behave. Ernest Holmes speaks very eloquently to this also. In a moment I will ask Thor if he'll put this quote up. This is from The Science of Mind, and this is Ernest Holmes in The Science of Mind talking to practitioners about working with other people, how to help, how to support other people. And in this quote, he references disease. And while he may be speaking to a range of issues, I'm going to say this diseased thinking is that which keeps us tied to the past so very often. And so Ernest Holmes says this: disease will be healed, provided you get at its cause and remove it. And by getting at its cause, we mean getting at the mental cause, and provided the one for whom you are working is willing to surrender that cause. And that is a really, really important caveat. Because Ernest goes on to say, you cannot heal anyone of her or his trouble if it is a result of some mental attitude which they will not surrender. That is incredibly powerful to me. And looking at this quote describes in real-world terms how we have arrived where we are as a society, as a community, as a civilization. if you look at what's going on in the world, does it not seem this beautiful, precious humanity is comprised of mostly members of this group who are not always so anxious to part, to surrender the very ideas which have allowed us to arrive where we are? And so if that is the case, how then do we ever make progress? How do we ever move forward as a spiritual community, as a city, as a state, a nation, a world? How do we ever move forward in some positive, productive way if the bulk of us are holding on to things that we refuse to let go that once were true but no longer serve? And so it was about probably 2005, let's say, around the mid 2004, 5, 6, somewhere in that range. I was still living in Las Vegas, Nevada, still working at the fabulous Venetian Resort Hotel and Casino on the Las Vegas Strip. I was a craps dealer, or a croupier, and for me those terms are interchangeable. For you, I don't know what those might mean. However, I was working one evening at the Venetian, and if you've been around a crap game, a dice game, there's 3 or 4 employees, 3 or 4 workers on that game. It takes a crew of people to run one of those games. And I was on that game when the players suddenly, the dice weren't being particularly friendly to them, so everybody left, and we were just kind of standing there. And so I had a conversation with a coworker, and this man's name is Keith. And Keith had been on a wind sprint to get to the game that evening, to show up on time. He was running a little bit late, and even after our game went idle, he was still in that sort of frenetic, frenzied kind of feeling where you started late and it just hasn't gotten much better yet. You're still in that hectic sort of pace. And he shared with me, he said, I hate running late, and some things happened at home. I had to leave a little later than I normally would. And then I got to the Strip, and I was coming across the Strip, and there were people everywhere in the street with their signs demonstrating in favor of marriage equality and gay marriage and all this stuff. And he just went off a little bit. Said, you know what, I don't even know if those people should be married, if they should have a right to be married, but they certainly shouldn't have any right to be in the street and prevent me from getting to work on time. And so he was visibly shaken. He was really upset about this, and so I realized that I had an opportunity, perhaps, to make a difference with him. And I also realized that from the tone of his voice and from his experience and from just his demeanor that evening, that he was likely also in possession of a mental attitude which he might not so willingly surrender. So I chose not to convince him of my superior intellect and brilliance. And while it may be very true, in that moment, I suspected it would win no favor with my friend Keith. And so I did what I do, which is to tell a story. And I shared with Keith a story of a friend of mine who also lived in Vegas, and his name is Jamie. And I shared that Jamie spent 10 years with the love of his life in a same-sex relationship. In fact, Jamie worked 2 or 3 bartending jobs at a time, taking on extra shifts, showing up early, staying late, doing whatever he could to make enough money to support his partner through medical school. And the partner ultimately graduated medical school and became a successful emergency room doctor, Jamie put his partner through medical school. In the wee hours one morning, after a 24-hour shift in the emergency room, the partner was returning home when he was sideswiped by a car that failed to stop for a red light. And Jamie's partner would not survive that accident. And to say that Jamie's world turned on a dime might be an understatement. He lost his partner in that accident. But because they were unable to marry, the partner's family, which Jamie assumed was his family by now, had their own ideas about how the estate would be dispersed. Jamie still suffered from credit issues from his younger and more raucous days in Las Vegas. And so his now successful doctor partner bought everything in their lives in his name, including Jamie's car, including the home they shared. And they failed to ever put Jamie on title. And so the family, sanctioned by the court system, was able to and did take everything in that estate, right down to the commitment ring which had been given to Jamie, for which the partner retained a receipt, making it then the property of the estate. And as I completed telling that story, my friend Keith was still visibly shaken, but from a much different cause. We worked the rest of the evening together, and when we were going home that night, clocking out, he came up to me and said, "You know what? I have had a night like none other." And he said, "I want to share something with you." He said, "It made such a difference what you told me tonight." And he said, "I see this so differently." He said, "I'm going to tell you right now, I will advocate for marriage equality. And if I am ever given the opportunity to vote for it, I will support it." And it's wonderful that the story ended in that way. But the bigger story, or the bigger question really is, how did that happen? How was my friend Keith able and willing to surrender a mental attitude which only a few minutes before had been so ingrained in him, had been so strong in him? How was he able to do that? And that brings me to my talk title today, which is, as you see it, the heart of the matter. And the fact is, Keith absolutely had a change of mind that night. But he didn't have a change of mind until he had a change of heart. And therein lies the lesson, and therein lies our work. We spend so damn much time going through life in an effort to force our ideas and attitudes and opinions and beliefs on other people. And my friends, that is the work of the head. The most important work we will ever do doesn't come from the head, doesn't come from an intellectual standpoint. The most important work we will ever do comes from the heart. And the old saying is, changing minds, and hearts. We often forget about the heart, but that is where the real work is to be done, and that is where the real progress can be made. I won't stand here and tell you that you can go out and change everybody's heart, but you can change hearts. And so, if you hear nothing else, please hear this. I live in the same world you live in. We are all in this together. I see the same things going on in the world, but what I know absolutely beyond any shadow of doubt is we are not relegated to some less than life. We are not relegated to living in a world that seems to be crumbling around its very foundations with no way out. So what do? We surrender to what is. We surrender to the reality of the situation as we see it. We surrender. And we step into this place of freedom where we are so free there is nothing that constrains us in any way, shape, or form. And we create from there. Asking this question: what would we create if we didn't know we couldn't? Because the possibilities are endless. We live in this limitless world. When we stand in this place without restraint, we find those solutions which to this point we haven't even thought of. That's how we move forward. So we go forward. We pick our battles. We pick our causes, and we go forward, making a difference. Not bludgeoning someone over the head with our superior brilliance and intellect and spirituality. Not seeking ever to change someone's mind. We go forward changing hearts. Because when you change someone's heart, the mind will always follow. Happy Sunday, everybody. Thank you so much for being here.